Welcome back to the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Heizou, the next character in our character archive, and obviously as we talk about him, he's actually our first Inazuman character we're going to be talking about before we get into the rest of the Inazuman characters. So let's go ahead and jump in right into his talents and what he's going to be offering as a character. Now, looking at talent priority, you're going to want to focus into your normal attacks and your skills. Your skill has the highest priority, then your normal attacks, then your burst. Your burst is more or less something that you're just going to extra throw in whenever you have it, not necessarily something that you're going to go after extremely fully, which means that you're not going to have a lot of energy recharge. Now, looking at his normal attacks, it's very basic, just a bunch of extra damage, but his skill is where, once again, the biggest part of his kit kind of comes in. Now with this though, you have a tap and a hold version. The tap version states that it will launch a Heartstopper strike that deals ammo damage to opponents. So if we take a look at that, that's basically as soon as I just tap my skill, just does a damage hit right there. Now, also on top of that though, as we are going to be looking at the character though specifically, there's a little bit more that comes into play, especially when you're looking at the hold version. The hold version states that it charges energy to unleash an even stronger blow, which means that he will obtain declension effect stacks while charging. So as he's charging, he's going to have multiple stacks of these increased, and you're going to get a maximum of 4 of these, and we'll look at that whenever we look at declension down here in a second. But at that point in time, he will increase the power of his Heartstopper strike, and when the skill button is released, or if the skill finishes charging, so if you get all of the stacks that are necessary, it will immediately hit even if you don't want it to. It will then do ammo damage instead as well. Now with the declension stacks or the declension effect, whatever, it increases the power of the next Heartstopper strike, and you can have a max of 4 stacks of this. When you possess 4 declension stacks, the conviction effect will be produced. Now, which will cause the next Heartstopper strike to be even stronger and have a larger AoE. Now in a very basic sense, what all that means is as I'm running with Heizou, you can easily just be throwing, I'm going to hold my skill, and you're going to see on this left side here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's going to immediately throw out and do a bigger damage hit. Now what that means is you can hit multiple enemies at one time, a little bit bigger of an AoE than what he normally was going to do, as well as it helped with more damage based on the declension stacks that he has. So looking at this in the skill attributes, the initial damage hit is going to be 455%. This is all at level 12 because I have a 9 plus 3. But with this, though, you're having an extra on top of this 454% or 455%. On top of that, you have 114% about per stack, which there's 4 of these. So take 114 times 4, add that on top of 455. And because you have all 4 stacks, on your conviction damage bonus is going to be added on top of that as well. So as you can see here, a very, very big damage hit that you can get from just all the stacking, even from just a 4-star. And that's just talking at C0, never talking about his Constellations as well. This huge damage hit can do a lot of damage to just regular opponents, which we're going to go look at in a second. But there's a little bit more I want to talk about when looking at gaining those stacks. Now I'm going to jump us a little bit further whenever we get to this passive talent, and we're going to skip the burst for just a quick second. And the reason why is because this passive talent helps you get those stacks quicker. Now when Heizou activates a swirl reaction while on the field, he will gain 1 declension stack instead for his Heartstopper strike, and it can be triggered every 0.1 second. So as I walk over here, I'm going to be looking at, obviously something like a Hilichurl or whatever is not going to, it has nothing on there, so I can't swirl. But since he's a catalyst, I can't swirl, right? So I don't have any of those declension stacks that hit. But if I walk over to a slime, you see one of those stacks on my left already are triggered, right? So if I do another hit, that's just another stack, and if I'm not frozen for 4 seconds, then you can see now I have these stacks. Now if I do my big damage hit, all of that damage is going to be buffed on top of what I'm going to be doing here. So once again, allowing even just multiple attacks that can just hit here, you're going to be focusing on making sure that you're doing bigger damage hits to make sure that you're going to be, as you just saw, I absolutely just obliterated a bunch of Hilichurls in my way. So that's the whole point with him. And that's another reason why you're going to be running a lot of characters with him that are running a lot of swirl reactions for him. He does actually, like with Wanderer, another character that has other characters with him that are going to help him as a character. Even though their damage isn't going to be extremely good for the team, like it's not going to be amazing or anything like that, it's more supportive capabilities to make sure even if something like Hilichurls or whatever, or Nobushi or whatever that don't have any elements on them, if Heizou can at least have Xingqiu or Bennett or whatever put an element on top of them for him to swirl, then he can make sure to swirl on top of that and get his stacks extremely quicker. It's just a lot easier than sitting there for 4 seconds waiting for this thing to charge up and then doing a big damage hit as well. So once again, just another reason why that passive talent is just very useful for him as a character. But going over to his burst that we skipped, this leaps into the air, basically doing a huge damage hit called Vacuum Slugger. At this point in time, basically, it's just a huge wind tunnel that's just going to pull a bunch of enemies together and doing some extra damage. And then also on top of that, because it's, once again, an animal character, once it comes into contact with Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, this specific damage hit, these opponents that are hit by it will be afflicted with the Windmuster Iris. And Windmuster Iris will then explode after a certain moment in time and then dissipate, dealing AoE damage of the corresponding element that was just swirled. So if you swirled Hydro, let's say, from Xingqiu, and when you do your burst and they had Hydro on them, you do a big damage hit with your burst, they will then get Windmuster Iris of Hydro, and then afterwards get another damage hit of Hydro on top of whatever the damage they took from his initial hit as well. So the Vacuum Slugger can afflict a maximum of 4 different opponents that are there with the Windmuster Iris, and a single opponent cannot be under the multiple basically different elements that he hits. So if they're going to be hit with Hydro, they're going to be hit with Hydro. You can't obviously stack different elements of the same type. So once again, Burst, basically just think of it as a huge AoE damage hit for Anemo. More or less something that you have whenever you have it and use it when you have it, and that's kind of it. Now, looking at his second passive talent, not necessarily anything that I think you would want to go home and talk to mom about, because after Heizou's Heartstopper Strike hits an opponent, that huge damage hit from his skill, it increases all party members' elemental mastery by 80 for 10 seconds. With his teams, once again, you're not really focusing on swirling or doing swirl damage. You're using swirl to allow himself to get stacks to do anemo damage. You're not trying to focus on the reaction. You're trying to use the reaction to buff himself. Very much, once again, similar to what kind of Wanderer does. He swirls an element not to use that element or make use of swirl, but he gets that element to make sure that he can get personal buffs for himself. So very similar to what Heizou does as well as a character. Looking a little bit beyond the actual talents here, let's go ahead and look at weapons. Now, there's a bunch of different weapons that Heizou can use, especially in 5 stars, because a lot of them can help him. And a lot of different weapons help with normal attack damage bonuses, like Tule Tula's or Toma the Eternal Flow with charge attacks. And even, Supervision, Risley's weapon is another weapon that could help out as well when looking at these types of things that could be, kind of useful overall as a character. But when I'm looking overall at different weapons that I actually like, probably my favorite is going to be Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds. I got very lucky actually on one of the standard banners and actually got to drop this weapon. A very good weapon for him, in my personal opinion, the best. I know other people bring up even Kagura's Verity because it's a very good stat stick with crit damage, and it does help over time. You could technically get one of the stacks from the refinement ability and get like a 12% elemental skill damage bonus, which is very nice, or something like that. It's a very good weapon that I think could be used. Once again, stat stick, it's nice, it's a good weapon, but overall, I think Lost Prayer of Sacred Winds just does better. The crit rate is at 33.1% with 608 base attack. The movement speed is increased, which he's going to be running around a lot, but also the major part is when in battle, he's getting an 8% elemental damage bonus for every 4 seconds that he's on the field, and it has a max of 4 stacks, so you can get up to 32%. You're probably only going to get to like 24%, probably at max. You don't really want to keep him on the field for too long, but you could probably still keep him on the field for about 12 seconds, and that still would make sense for him as a character, so that would be fine as well. Now, looking at the other characters that you would, or weapons, that you would really use, Skyward Atlas is another weapon. It's an attack percent weapon. The reason I don't like this weapon, or not as much as Lost Prayer, is because it's an attack percent weapon, and the ability is okay. It's not terrible. It's just okay. It's the extra damage hit that you can get for attack percent, based on that, and do an extra damage hit for opponents that you've hit. So it's nice, it's good, but I wouldn't really say that it's better than Lost Prayer. I do like to make sure that I have a higher crit rate on my DPS characters, especially ones like Navia and Heizou, who don't hit very often, and it's kind of all focused on one huge damage hit, or with Navia it's 2. So I like to have a very high crit rate, like around 70 to 80 with them as characters. So you'll tend to see that with Heizou's, at least for me as well. I like to have crit rate weapons, which actually brings us to our 4-star weapons as well. Looking at the 4-star weapons, my favorite is going to be Solar Pearl. Never mind that it's a crit rate main stat weapon, and this is not free to play, sadly. It does mean that you have to get the battle pass, but if you do get this weapon, very, very good for Heizou. In my personal opinion, can even beat some of the other 5 stars because of its refinement ability as well as its main stat. The refinement ability states that normal attacks increase elemental skill and elemental burst damage by 20% for 6 seconds, and likewise, elemental skill or burst hits increase normal attack damage by 20% for 6 seconds. So it's a give and take on basically both of those fronts. And as you saw me use Heizou earlier, you're doing a bunch of normal attacks over and over again, which are then going to basically help you do your skill hit. Which Solar Pearl means as you do more basic or normal attacks, your next skill hit's going to do more damage or burst hit. And it's the same thing with your burst. So as soon as you do your burst or your skill hit that I just did, as soon as you use your burst or your skill, then your normal attacks are now increased. So very helpful, and it's a very good weapon for Heizou. It's probably one of the best that works with him as a personal character. Like overall, this specific weapon fits him to a T. Never mind does it look great and actually kind of matches his aesthetic, but it's actually a very good weapon for him, and every part of the weapon is used to its fullest and matches the character's kit extremely well. Now, another weapon that I know people are going to talk about is Widsith, because it's basically a stat stick weapon, as well as the ability on it isn't bad. The only issue with Widsith are 2 things. If you happen to get the Elemental Mastery instead of the Elemental Damage bonus or the attack percent from the song that you randomly get every 30 seconds, and also this has you basically every 30 seconds get a song that lasts for 10 seconds, which means you have 20 seconds to wait till the next song triggers. And if you get 480 Elemental Mastery as Heizou, once again, you don't care for Elemental Mastery because that's just increasing swirl damage. Going into Elemental Mastery as other weapons, I would say if you don't have any crit weapons, I would just say to go for attack percent weapons, because people who say to use Mapamare or go ahead and use Fav Codex, no offense, they don't know what they're talking about, because this is energy recharge. You don't care for this weapon at all, and it's only helping with more particles as well. So Fav Codex is out the window. Mapamare you could technically use because you kind of get some extra elemental damage bonus if you trigger swirl or any type of elemental reaction, so that could be good. But once again, its main stat is Elemental Mastery, which you don't care about, once again, because you're not trying to make Swirl the biggest part. I would rather you use something like Eye of Perception, which is an attack percent main stat weapon, rather than something like Mapamare, just because of how it's going to work as a weapon. And even these energy recharge weapons are practically even worse, in my opinion, than what you could find in these other weapons that are attack percent, just because the main stats are going to do you better than trying to find an okay to good refinement ability. Looking beyond weapons, let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. Now with him, this is another thing that I think I kind of disagree almost with most of the community, and that is with the 4-piece Viridescent. Once again, just another reason I don't like the whole point of using Swirl, and as the 2-piece is great, and you can even see that I'm running a 2-piece Viridescent, I don't like the 4-piece Viridescent on Heizou at all. It increases swirl damage, which you don't care for, and the numbers aren't going to be hitting like 10, 12k consistently while you're doing this. Like, this is not going to be increasing your numbers to a crazy extent. And then it decreases opponent's elemental resistance to the element infused in the swirl reaction by 40% for 10 seconds. Once again, it's another reason to help other characters besides Heizou. Heizou is the DPS of the team, and you're just using him as a driver to help characters like Xingqiu and Bennett, which last time I checked, Heizou's the damage dealer, not Xingqiu and Bennett in this team. And Xingqiu and Bennett aren't going to be throwing out crazy numbers compared to what Heizou is going to be throwing out, so I don't see the reason in running a 4-piece Viridescent. Once again, doing a 2-piece combination is probably going to be the best way. Running 2-piece Viridescent with the Anemo damage bonus, and then any of the 2-piece attack percent sets, and they only have Shimenawa's and Gladiator's Finale up here, but there's Vermilion Hereafter, there's a few new sets that actually came out, Fragment of the Harmonic Whimsy, and Nighttime in the Whispering Woods. There's plenty of attack percent 2-piece sets that could be extremely useful for you, instead of just running the 4-piece Viridescent. And I would much rather you choose a 2-piece of attack percent than running this 4-piece Viridescent. Now, in my personal opinion, the best combination you can have in these sets, though, is a 2-piece Viridescent and a 2-piece Golden Troop. The reason I really like the 2-piece Golden Troop, it easily just states here that it increases elemental skill damage by 20%, the whole reason that you build Heizou. Now, people are going to then think, okay, well, if the 2-piece of Golden Troop is good, why not run the 4-piece? Well, let's look at it. For the 4-piece, it increases elemental skill damage by 25%. Another 25%. All right, we already more than doubled our number in the 2-piece. So what's the issue? Additionally, when not on the field, elemental skill damage will be further increased by 25%. Now, Heizou doesn't use his skills off field. You have to be on field to use his skill. So just another reason why this 4-piece, it's half good, half bad. So you can't use half of the 4-piece, so it's a little annoying as soon as that happens. So I don't necessarily like it too much. Now, the thing is that you could technically kind of get this effect because it states that this effect will be cleared 2 seconds after taking the field. So if you can jump on field and immediately have 4 of your declension stacks and then throw out your skill immediately before this effect gets cleared, run with it. But I really do feel like for ease of play as well as just overall how good he is as a character, I think the 2-piece Viridescent and the 2-piece Golden Troop are just going to be better. Now, in terms of main stats for weapons, I do want to talk about, or artifacts, sorry, I do want to talk about the Sands is going to be attack percent. Don't go for Elemental Mastery or Energy Recharge. Not worth it, either one of those. Once again, you're not caring about Swirl. You care mostly about personal damage for Heizou. Now, a Goblet, I can see if people want to tell me that they want to run an attack percent Goblet here because he already ascends into Animo damage bonus, and he's already running a 2-piece Viridescent. So why not just run an attack percent Sands? Or an attack percent Goblet with an attack percent Sands. You can go ahead and do that. I have no issues, no qualms with it at all. Personally, from what I've seen, I still actually do better with similar stats on an Animo damage bonus Goblet as an attack percent Goblet, and this one just happened to fit my account a little bit better, so I do like the Animo damage bonus Goblet better just because it fits for my account. But if you run an attack percent Goblet, I could also see the desire in that as well, so keep that in mind. I do feel like also, even with all the Animo damage bonus, with certain characters, it almost hits like a ceiling of like you're just not doing as much damage. But I feel like with Heizou, actually, I'm not having those issues, so I'm okay with still running this Goblet on him. Now, I do want to talk about with the Circlet, you're going to want to go for crit rate or crit damage. You're wanting to make sure that you have a very good crit rate. I've already talked about that before, how you want to make sure you have a high crit rate with him. And because of Constellations, even though I know I said I want a 70 to 80% crit rate, with Constellations that I have, I'm basically going to be there. I'm actually over 80%. So once again, with this crit rate, make sure that you have a high crit rate because all it matters is that you have a high amount of crit rate to make sure you're always hitting that high damage hit on the skill. Trying to break 70, in my personal opinion, is going to be the best for you, even if it comes at expense of crit damage. Now, once again, as we talk about Constellations now, keep this in mind that I'm at 64.5%, and we'll come back to that in a second whenever we talk about the 6th Constellation. Looking at the first Constellation, though, it states that for 5 seconds after Heizou takes the field, his normal attack speed is increased by 15%. That's nice, but not the whole point of him as a character. This is kind of the whole point of the Constellation that I really like. He also gains 1 declension stack for Heartstopper Strike or his skill, and this effect can be triggered once every 10 seconds. So as soon as I take the field, as you can see, I have 0 stacks. I used them all up in my last skill. I mean, I can even do it again to just get rid of them all. Just another reason, right? Okay, you've just done that. Switch to all your characters, do all the stuff that you need to use burst, use whatever, switch to Heizou. Already has now, with that first Constellation, gives you now another idea of an extra declension stack, which very, very good. And now you only have to do 3 normal attacks in the span of a second or so, and then you can do your skill, and it has the maximum stacks again. And would you look at that? Then switch your other characters, do your supports, blah, 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 and back to Heizou, and he has it again. So another reason why I really like this specific Constellation, helps with a lot of extra help with the declension stacks, and even if you're running around with Heizou and you're just waiting for the next battle in the overworld and you're kind of just running around looking for hilichurls to beat up, you can just, as you're running, be running around with other characters, and then as you saw, I had 1 declension stack. If I switch to another character, or him again, now he's at 2. I can switch off again as I keep running. I'll just be running around and just looking for other hilichurls to beat up in my current area. And Heizou. Now he's back at 3. Very easy to get to multiple different, stacks of this while he's running around in the overworld. And now as I see my final target to go ahead and run into, I'm at 4 stacks immediately, and it can do a huge damage hit as soon as I meet them. So that's kind of the whole idea that I like about that C1. Also that it doesn't just stay at one of them. You can still kind of stack that as you're running around. The Constellation 2, it states the pull effect of the arresting wind tunnel created by the burst is enhanced, giving it more pull effect, and its duration is increased to 1 second, allowing that a little bit more to help with grouping a little bit better so that Heizou can pull enemies close together with his burst and then allow him to do a huge damage hit with his skill, making sure he hits all the enemies instead of them being sporadically thrown out. The C3, I like that the skill here is increased by 3 because that allows it very easily for people who are trying to grab Constellations to get an easy +3 on the skill, which is the major part of his kit. So very nice that this is first. And then the C5 increases the level of the burst by 3. The C4, in a very basic sense, when you use your burst, you're going to get a bunch of elemental mastery. If you hit any of those subsequent explosions by any swirl reactions you do, then you're going to get more energy. So at the end of the day, it's a lot of extra energy, which once again, you don't care too much about. It's kind of just an extra constellation to have, but you really at that point are going after the C6. If you hit C3, you can stop there, but if you want to and go for the C6, the C4 and the C5 aren't really what you're going after. Now the C6, keep in mind when I talked about earlier my 64.5% crit rate, let's look at the C6. Each declension stack will increase the crit rate of the Heartstopper Strike unleashed by 4%. So 4 stacks of those that I can get from the declension stacks, and there's 4% crit rate I can get from each one. That's an extra 16% crit rate when I have full stacks, which with Heizou, even at C0 all the way to C6, you're only ever going to want to hit your opponent when you have the full stacks. So you're never going to want to walk up to an opponent only with 1 stack or no stacks. I would rather you sit there and charge the entire time rather than just sit there and try to hit them with a skill without any damage, because you're losing 4 times 114% on top of 227.5. So you're getting 2 times more damage because 113.8, and this is really going to test me here, but 113.8 times 4, I believe, is like 535 or something like that, which 4 of those stacks is already more than the damage bonus that you get from the skill, from the initial hit, right? And if you add like 227.5 on top of that, you're looking over 760%. And you're not even talking about the 455% or whatever you get from the main, which is over 1,000, over 1,200 or something like that, damage that you're already doing. A very high stack for just these damage bonuses. A very high hitting number that you can get with Heizou. So once again, the whole reason is make sure you're hitting, no matter if you're at C0 all the way to C6, always make sure you're hitting with 4 stacks that he has, not just 1. Now, finishing out this C6, when Heizou possesses the Conviction, which is when you have 4 stacks, this Heartstopper Strike's crit damage is increased by 32%. A little bit more help, crit rate, 16% crit rate, and 32% crit damage. A very nice C6 for a 4-star character. Now looking at the teams that, Heizou is going to run, the overall idea is always running him with Faruzan. Even if she's at C0, I know a lot of people are saying, which I don't understand, but the whole point is if you don't have a C6 Faruzan, she's useless. I don't believe that. With Faruzan, which we kind of talked about actually, I believe already with her, since she was a Sumeru character, I still like her even if she's at C0. I do have her at C6, but I still used her at C0 even when she was without, because with her burst, she gives an animo damage bonus as well as an animo resistance decrease. So still extremely, in my personal opinion, extremely useful on any animo DPS team. So with Heizou and Faruzan, they're going to be a very strong pair together. Use characters like Xingqiu or other high appliers, you could even use a Farina in this sense to constantly apply Hydro. You could use support characters if you want. You could even run a Shenhe. She increases normal attack, charge attacks, burst, and skill damage as well. So if you want to run her, you could run characters like Chi-Chi or whatever as your healer instead of your Bennett that you'd be running. You could run Dia, who does pyro application, as well as make sure that your opponents don't get hit very often or as hard. So she kind of takes some of the damage as well and kind of make sure that they don't get hit very hard. You could use characters like Xiangling or whatever if you want to. Characters like Diona, and even with her C6, she increases elemental mastery. Characters that are just basically going to be doing some extra kind of damage hits on top of what they can already do. Characters like Fischl, characters like Yelan even. Just elements that are going to be swirlable from off field as well are going to be very useful for this team. But in terms of a free-to-play friendly team, this is a very free-to-play friendly team. Heizou, Faruzan, Xingqiu, and Bennett. And no, I'm sorry to say, if you were just running him together, you're not going to hit the same exact numbers that I'm hitting. I want to be very transparent with this. I do have a C6 Heizou, and I do run him with a 5-star weapon. And a very strong, set that I've kind of grinded with him as a character, and very high talents. So I want to be very transparent with that. And with my Faruzan, she's well built as well. She's also C6 as you guys saw earlier. So with the gameplay that I'm going to show upcoming in a second, I want to make sure that the numbers that you're seeing, you may not see yourself. So I want to be very transparent, but still, that doesn't mean that he's absolutely useless. Once again, I can still use him actually in parts of content, especially the Imaginarium Theater recently. I actually was okay with using him in there as well. And I think that's the whole reason why we can build 4 stars is specifically because of the Imaginarium Theater allowing a lot more horizontal investment rather than what the Spiral Abyss kind of forces onto us going into vertical investment. So once again, overall, I just want to say Heizou's a good character, but the numbers you're seeing, if you haven't built him very similarly to what I have and the teammates that I have, just keep in mind you may not see the exact same numbers than what I do here soon.
Let me leave you a verse. Huh? Oh, teamwork is dreamwork. Dare to mess with me?
Bring it on! Confess!
We'll see about that. Know my sword. Rain cutter. Rain outlines your fate. Huh? Everybody stand! Huh? Have fun with this. Get witness the power of Gurwa. Know my sword. Let's light it up. I'm going in. Years of the sword. Huh? Let me leave you a verse. Huh? Everybody stand.
Bring it on! Confess!
Have fun with this. Get witness the power of Gurwa. Know my sword. Rain outline. Yeah. Teamwork is
Fracture!
Well, that's everything I've got talking about Heizou. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Let me know how you guys build your Heizou. If you guys feel differently about how you guys would build him, kind of how you guys would use him, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. And thank you guys once again for watching the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.